Ilara's hands were raw. Her fingers blistered from endless labor. Yet it was not the pain of work that weighed heaviest on her heart. It was shame. Shame for being sold as a slave. Shame for failing her family. Shame for the uselessness everyone whispered about behind her back. In the shadowed kingdom of Valdoria, strength, beauty, and talent determined worth, and Ilara had none, or so she believed. The day she was sold to repay her family's crushing debt began like any other. With the sun rising over the jagged cliffs outside her village, a cruel twist of fate had brought the kingdom's collectors to her home, and within hours, her life as a free woman ended. Bound in chains, she was marched through bustling towns and silent forests alike, each step echoing the finality of her new reality. When she arrived at the gates of Kael's citadel, her eyes widened at the towering walls. Dark stone climbed toward the sky, crowned with sharp spires that seemed to pierce the clouds. The castle exuded power. A palpable force hummed in the air, invisible yet undeniable. Ilara shivered, clutching the worn straps of her simple dress as she was pushed forward by the guards. Inside, the halls were vast and gilded, filled with portraits of stern kings, queens draped in velvet, and battles etched in gold. Every step she took sounded hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence. She noticed the other slaves, some bowed low, others moved with practiced grace, their expressions blank masks of fear and obedience. Ilara felt small, worthless in comparison. She had no strength to fight, no charm to enchant, and no cunning to outwit. She had only her trembling heart. It was then that she first saw him, Alpha King Kael. He stood at the end of a long corridor, the light of torches flickering against the sharp lines of his face. His presence demanded attention without a single word. He was tall, broader than most men, and his gaze alone could make hearts falter. His eyes, a pale silver that seemed almost unnatural, swept over the room as if he could see everything and everyone's secrets. When his gaze landed on Ilara, the world seemed to hush. She felt as though she were exposed, every fear and doubt laid bare before him. Kael's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile, and she immediately hated him for the way it unsettled her. He did not speak, did not call her forward, yet the air seemed to vibrate with his silent power. Ilara felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to stand tall, a trembling defiance in her posture. The days that followed were grueling. Ilara's tasks were simple, yet others laughed at her clumsiness. She spilled water meant for the king's chambers, dropped heavy bundles of linens, and faltered under the exacting gaze of Kael's servants. But no matter how much she failed, Kael never punished her. He observed, quietly, like a predator studying a fledgling bird. There were moments when she caught him watching her from shadowed balconies, his expression unreadable. And though fear settled in her chest, there was also a flicker of something dangerous. Curiosity. He noticed her, among all the slaves, and that alone made her heart pound. One evening, when the wind howled against the castle walls and the moon carved silver patterns across the floors, Kael summoned her. Ilara's stomach tightened. She walked through the corridors, heart hammering, uncertain whether she should feel dread or hope. "Stand," Kael commanded when she entered the grand hall. His voice was smooth, low, yet it carried authority that made the air around him tremble. "You are not like the others." Ilara's throat went dry. She swallowed hard. I do what I can, my lord." Kael's gaze pierced her. "Do you?" he asked softly, almost curiously. "Or do you survive because you have nothing left to lose?" She frowned, confused by the sudden intensity in his tone. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were measuring her, weighing her worth on some invisible scale. I survive because I must," she said, her voice quivering. Kael's lips curved again, this time not a smile but a shadow of one. Perhaps that is more than most king's advisors can claim. He stepped closer, and the room seemed to grow smaller, the flickering torchlight reflecting in his silver eyes. "You have a spark, Ilara. A spark that refuses to die, even when the world tells you it should." Alara's heart raced. She had never been called anything but useless. Not once had anyone remarked on courage or resilience. The words left her trembling not entirely from fear, but from a fragile, aching hope she did not yet dare to name. Then, the unexpected happened. Kale reached out, not touching, yet brushing against her with the faintest hint of command, and traced a line along her wrist. A subtle warmth spread where his hand hovered, and she gasped as a faint sigil glowed briefly beneath her skin. "You are bound now," Kale said quietly. His voice was velvet and steel. "By mark, by fate, by choice, perhaps by all three. The castle will whisper your name differently from tonight." Alara's breath caught. "Bound? To you?" she whispered. The word sounded impossible, terrifying, and thrilling all at once. Kale's eyes softened, but only a fraction. Not as a servant, not as a pawn, but as something more. Something dangerous. He turned, long cloak trailing behind him, and left her trembling in the silent hall. For days afterward, Alara could not think clearly. Every glance, every whisper, every servant's quiet glance seemed laden with new meaning. She was no longer just a slave. Something unseen had shifted. A chain unseen but undeniable. The other slaves avoided her, their eyes wary, and even the castle walls seemed to hum with her presence. Fear battled with a strange, rising pride. Could it be that the king had truly noticed her? Chosen her for something more than servitude? Could someone so terrifying, so powerful, see worth in someone as ordinary as her? Her dreams at night became restless, filled with the flickering silver eyes of Kale, the warmth of the sigil on her wrist, and the strange, intoxicating pull of destiny. Sometimes she imagined him speaking her name with a softness she had never known. Other times, she imagined the castle's dark corridors closing around her, trapping her forever, in chains not of iron, but of fate and desire. And yet, even with her growing hope, a tremor of fear lingered. For the sigil was more than a mark, it was a promise, a warning, a challenge. It bound her to Kale in ways she did not yet understand. Every step she took through the gilded halls was shadowed by the weight of expectation and the whispered words of those who said she was unworthy. But deep inside, beneath the fear, beneath the shame, a small, fierce ember of courage began to glow. Alara did not know what the future held, or whether she could survive it. Yet for the first time in her life, she felt that she might not just endure, she might change the destiny forced upon her. And somewhere, in the cold, gilded castle, the Alpha King Kale waited, silver eyes reflecting a storm of power and emotion, watching the girl he had marked and wondering if she would rise to meet the fate he had set before her, or be crushed beneath it. Alara did not yet know the full measure of Kale's intentions. She did not yet know the depth of her own strength. But one thing was certain. Her life had changed forever, and the chains that once bound her body were nothing compared to the chains that now bound her heart. As the moonlight spilled across the hall, and the castle slept under a shroud of shadow and magic, Alara whispered her own name, feeling it echo with a strange new weight. "Alara, I am not yours. Yet. But I will survive, no matter what comes." And in that silent vow, the first spark of destiny flared. The castle of Valdoria was alive in ways Alara could feel but not see. It whispered in the halls, sighed through the corridors, and seemed to shift subtly whenever she walked its labyrinthine passages. She had been marked by the Alpha King Kale, and the effect of the sigil was already beginning to change her life, though not in the ways she expected. The other servants treated her with cautious distance now. Some avoided her entirely, muttering warnings behind closed doors. Others cast curious, suspicious glances, as if daring her to fail and justify Kale's choice. But there were moments, rare and fleeting, when the castle itself seemed to acknowledge her presence. A torch flickered brighter as she passed. A painting's eyes, once painted to stare at the floor, seemed to follow her, approving, or perhaps warning. Alara had spent countless hours cleaning, cooking, and learning the smallest ways to serve without drawing humiliation. But every day, Kale watched, not with the harsh judgment of a king over a servant, but with a quiet, inscrutable intensity. His gaze, sharp and unyielding, seemed to measure her courage, her resilience, and perhaps even the flicker of something more, a strength she did not yet fully understand. "Why do you linger in the halls?" Cale asked one evening, his voice smooth and commanding as ever, echoing faintly in the candle-lit corridor. Ilara started, bowing her head. I thought I could learn the castle's ways, my lord." He stepped closer, the air around him heavy with authority. "Most servants learn to obey, not to wander. You do both, and yet you linger. Why?" Her cheeks flushed, but she lifted her gaze. "Because I wish to survive, my lord, to do right by the mark you gave me." Kael's expression softened slightly, but only slightly. "The mark binds you in ways that go beyond obedience. You are more than a servant, Ilara, more than most would dare to be in this castle." She felt her stomach tighten. Each word was both a promise and a challenge. How could she live up to expectations she barely understood? How could she serve a king whose power and presence were almost unbearable? And yet, a strange hope began to bloom within her. Days passed with a rhythm of whispered warnings, small tests, and subtle lessons. Kael did not speak often, but his presence alone was a teacher. He demonstrated strength in ways that were silent yet unmistakable, how a glance could command attention, how a quiet word could shift the course of conversation, how power could be both terrifying and protective. Ilara began to notice more than the castle's strange movements, or the watchful eyes of the other servants. She noticed Kael himself. In private moments, when the world outside the grand hall seemed distant, he would move with a gentleness she had never expected from the fearsome king. Sometimes, he would allow her to carry a message for him, or watch her handle a simple task, and though his gaze was still sharp, it held a faint trace of something unspoken. It was during one such evening, when the storm outside rattled the high windows, that Kael summoned her to the inner sanctum, a room few were allowed to enter. The air smelled of old parchment, incense, and a faint tang of magic. Candles flickered along the walls, casting shadows that danced like ghostly dancers. "Walk carefully," Kael said, his voice unusually soft. "The halls have eyes." Ilara nodded, her pulse quickening. "Yes, my lord." When she entered the room, Kael was already there, studying a map etched with glowing symbols. His fingers traced a path across the kingdom's borders, and for a moment, Ilara saw not the king, but the man, a man burdened with the weight of responsibility, of war, of history. "You are learning," he said without looking at her, "faster than I expected." I try, my lord," she said, her voice small but steady. Kael finally looked at her. His silver eyes were unreadable, yet she felt as though he could see every fear and doubt inside her. "You have courage," he said, "but courage alone will not protect you in this place. Strength is more than the body. It is the mind, the heart, the will to act when all else fails." Ilara swallowed, feeling the truth of his words like a weight on her chest. She had lived her life believing she was powerless. And yet here she was, in the presence of the most powerful man in the kingdom, being told that perhaps she had power she had not yet realized. Over the next weeks, Kael tested her in subtle ways. He sent her to deliver messages to the nobles, watched her navigate tense conversations with the court, and allowed her small freedoms to move about the castle. Each time she succeeded, a quiet satisfaction stirred in her chest, though always mingled with fear. One wrong step could undo everything. One misjudged word could bring humiliation, or worse. And yet, with each small victory, she began to feel a strange connection to Kael. Not one of fear alone, but of understanding. She glimpsed the loneliness beneath his power, the isolation of a king who could trust no one fully. In turn, he seemed to study her, not as a subject or servant, but as someone who might stand beside him, perhaps even understand him in ways others could not. Then came the night of the first attack. Ilara had been carrying a message through the castle when shouts echoed from the outer walls. The enemy had come, seeking to exploit the chaos of Kael's court. Panic rippled through the halls. Guards ran to arm themselves. Servants screamed, and the castle gates trembled under the force of battering rams. Kael appeared at the hall's entrance like a shadow of the storm itself. His presence was magnetic, terrifying, and commanding all at once. Alara froze, unsure whether to run or hide, but then she remembered the mark, the bond, and something deeper, a growing, inexplicable sense of purpose. As chaos erupted around them, Kael's silver eyes found hers. There was no fear there, only a silent command. And in that instant, she understood. She acted. With trembling hands and a courage she had not known she possessed, Alara moved quickly to warn the guards of a hidden passage the enemy might use. Her knowledge of the castle, her observation skills, her resilience, all the things she had believed useless became her strength. She guided Kael's men, helped barricade doors, and even led a small group of servants to safety. Kael moved through the fray like a storm of steel, but it was Alara's quick thinking that gave him the advantage. When the battle was over, the enemy repelled, and the castle secured, Kael stood before her, chest heaving, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that left her breathless. "You," he began, and then paused. His gaze softened just a fraction. "You saved lives tonight." Alara's heart pounded. I only did what I could, my lord," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Kael stepped closer, so close that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "No, you did more than that. You showed courage, quick thinking, and perhaps something else I did not expect. Strength is not always muscle or magic. Sometimes it is heart. Sometimes it is fire." Alara felt her chest tighten. She had never imagined anyone would speak to her like that, not a king, not anyone. Her cheeks burned, a mixture of pride, fear, and something she could not name. And then, before she could respond, Kael's hand hovered near hers, the faintest trace of the sigil glimmering as if recognizing her courage. "The mark, it responds to you. Perhaps you were always meant to bear it, Alara. Perhaps it chose you because you are not as helpless as the world believes." Her breath caught. Every word, every glance, every subtle movement from Kael was a test, a challenge, and an acknowledgement, all at once. She felt as though the castle itself watched, waiting to see what she would do next. That night, as she lay on the hard cot in the servants' quarters, sleep would not come. She thought of Kael, of the battle, of the mark that burned faintly on her wrist. She realized, with a mixture of fear and wonder, that she no longer wished to be merely a survivor. She wished to rise, to stand, to prove that the spark he saw in her was real. And somewhere deep within, a thought lingered, one she barely dared to name. Perhaps, in the vast, shadowed halls of Valdoria, she had found more than survival. Perhaps she had found a place where she might belong. But belonging came with a price. And the castle, with its whispers and shadows, seemed to murmur that the true trials were only beginning. The castle of Valdoria had grown colder in the weeks following the attack. The stone walls, once merely imposing, now seemed to hum with a restless energy. Alara could feel it in the way shadows stretched unnaturally along the corridors, and how the flicker of candlelight seemed to dance with intent. She had learned much in her time at the castle, how to navigate whispers among the courtiers, how to anticipate Kael's moods, and how to move with confidence through spaces that once terrified her. Yet, with each passing day, the weight of expectation pressed heavier upon her. Kael had begun to involve her in matters far beyond her understanding at first. Maps, messages from neighboring kingdoms, reports of uprisings. She learned quickly that every word, every movement, could carry consequences. The court watched her with suspicion. Many whispered that the Alpha King's fascination with her was a dangerous indulgence, a weakness that enemies could exploit. Yet Kael's attention never wavered. If anything, it deepened. "Ilara," Kael said one evening as she studied the map with him, "do you understand what is at stake?" His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of 100 silent commands. She nodded. "Yes, my lord. I understand that the kingdom is in danger, and that you must protect it at all costs." He studied her for a long moment, his silver eyes reflecting the torchlight. And yet, he murmured, protection is not enough. A queen must act when the time comes. She must see truth when others see only shadow. Do you have the courage for that? Elara's heart raced. Courage had been her companion, timid and flickering, but now it burned brighter. I will do my best, my lord. Kale inclined his head slightly, not with approval, but acknowledgement. Your best will be tested sooner than you imagine. The next day brought the test. A courier arrived with news of unrest on the outskirts of the kingdom. A rival, noble, ambitious and cunning, had stirred the villagers to rebellion. Kale's council debated strategies, voices raised, anger simmering beneath polite words. Elara stood to the side, listening, absorbing every nuance. She realized that knowledge alone was power. Understanding the fears and desires of people could turn tides faster than swords ever could. Kale's gaze occasionally flicked to her, sharp and assessing. In moments of tension, she saw the faintest traces of doubt, the weight of responsibility that no king could ever fully bear alone. And yet, he never underestimated her. Go, Kale finally said, gesturing to her. You know these lands. Speak to the villagers. Learn their grievances before they turn to rebellion. You may prevent bloodshed without drawing a single sword. Elara's pulse quickened. She had never been sent on a mission before. Her hands shook slightly as she gathered the parchment, maps, and messages Kale had entrusted to her. For a fleeting moment, fear threatened to paralyze her. And then she remembered the mark, the faint sigil on her wrist, still glowing with a warmth that seemed tied to her courage. She clenched her fist. I will do this, she whispered to herself. I will not fail. The journey to the village was long and treacherous. The road wound through forests shrouded in mist, over cliffs that overlooked raging rivers, and past ruins haunted by whispers of old kings who had fallen to treachery. Elara moved with care, her senses alert. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, made her pulse quicken, yet she pressed on, driven by the weight of the trust Kale had placed upon her. When she arrived, the villagers eyed her warily. Many had heard of the Alpha King's mark, but none had seen it. Whispers spread quickly. A slave, yet chosen by the king himself. Elara bowed respectfully, her heart pounding. I am here from King Kale, she announced, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. I have come to hear your concerns, to understand your troubles. The villagers were hesitant at first. Some scoffed, refusing to believe a mere slave could carry the authority of the Alpha King. Others, emboldened by fear or curiosity, spoke freely. They spoke of taxes too high, of soldiers taking more than their share, of the darkness creeping at the edges of their fields. Elara listened. She did not argue, did not chastise. She understood that understanding came before judgment. Slowly, she began to offer solutions, small, practical steps that addressed their fears while showing the influence of the king's guidance. She saw the shift in their expressions, the tension easing as they realized someone heard them, someone cared, someone could act. When she returned to the castle, Kale awaited her in the same hall where their first lessons had begun. His silver eyes glimmered with something difficult to define: pride, curiosity, perhaps admiration. You handled them well, he said, his voice low, almost a murmur. Better than I expected. Elara felt a blush rise to her cheeks. I only did what I could, my lord. Kale stepped closer, the air between them charged. No, he said firmly. You did what others would not. You acted when fear might have frozen them, and you acted when fear might have frozen you. That is courage. Her heart raced. Every word, every glance, every subtle gesture from him carried weight. She realized that Kale's attention was no longer merely observation. It was challenge, recognition, and something more. Something dangerous. Days turned into weeks, and Elara grew into her role. She learned the subtleties of the court, the hidden loyalties, and the quiet manipulations of nobles who would rather see her fail than succeed. Yet Kale remained her constant, silently guiding, silently testing, silently observing. And then came the night she would never forget. A messenger arrived, breathless and frantic. Dark forces had been sighted moving toward the kingdom, a coalition of mercenaries and rogue sorcerers seeking to exploit the growing unrest. Kale's council panicked, voices rising, swords drawn, magic humming at their fingertips. Kale moved with the grace and precision of a storm, commanding and cutting through chaos. Ilara followed, heart pounding. But this time she did not merely watch. She acted, drawing on everything she had learned, the whispers of the court, the fears of the people, the knowledge of the land. She guided Kale's forces with clarity and courage. When an ambush threatened to overwhelm the king, she found the hidden path through the forest that Kale had overlooked, leading his men to safety and turning the tide of battle. Kale paused amidst the chaos, silver eyes locking on hers. For a brief moment, the storm of war faded, leaving only two hearts, pounding in recognition of one another, his lips curved in the faintest acknowledgement. Not of victory alone, but of trust, reliance, and something unspoken yet undeniable. You have grown," he murmured later. Once the battle was won, his voice low and measured. "Stronger than I imagined, braver than I imagined, and perhaps more than I imagined." Ilara's breath caught. I only wanted to help, my lord. I did not for praise." Kale's gaze softened, just enough. "You do not understand, Ilara. You are no longer merely a survivor. You are becoming something remarkable." "And the mark," he said, lifting her wrist gently, the sigil glowing faintly, "responds to what is within you. Not just what you do. It recognizes courage, heart, fire, and loyalty." Her heart fluttered, caught between fear, pride, and something deeper. She had always thought herself powerless, useless, destined only for chains. Yet now, in the shadow of Kale, she felt alive and dangerous in ways she had never imagined. But power had its price. Whispers of jealousy and plotting began to swirl through the court. Some nobles dared to question her place, speaking of her origins as if that alone could unseat her. Some servants whispered warnings that Kale's attention was dangerous, that a mark from the Alpha King carried consequences beyond her understanding. Ilara knew they were right partially. The mark bound her to Kale, tied her fate to his, and yet it also awakened something within her, something fierce, unyielding, and untamed. She was no longer merely a pawn in a game of kings. She was becoming a player. That night, as she walked alone through the castle halls, torchlight flickering across the stone, she felt the weight of both freedom and responsibility pressing upon her. The mark on her wrist pulsed faintly, a reminder of the bond, the test, and the destiny she was only beginning to understand. Somewhere in the shadowed corridors, Kyle watched her, silent and unmoving, his thoughts hidden behind his inscrutable eyes. He had chosen her, marked her, and yet even he did not know the full measure of her strength or the fire she would ignite in him. The castle of Valdoria stirred as dawn broke, the first light glinting off stone towers and casting long shadows across the courtyards. Ilara stood at a high balcony, the cold wind tugging at her cloak. The mark on her wrist pulsed faintly, a constant reminder of her bond to Kale and the responsibilities it carried. For the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt purpose. The kingdom was no longer merely a backdrop to her survival. It was a living challenge, and she was learning to navigate it. The villagers, the nobles, even the hidden enemies who whispered in shadows, they all moved in patterns she had begun to recognize. And through it all, Kale remained her constant, his presence both a shield and a mirror of what she was becoming. "Today is the day, Ilara," Kale said, stepping beside her. His voice was low, commanding yet not harsh. A storm held in restraint, His silver eyes scanned the horizon as if he could see every threat before it emerged. The forces we have feared are moving. You must stand beside me. Not as a servant, not as a pupil, but as my queen in waiting. Alara's chest tightened at the words, Queen in waiting. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her journey from powerless slave to someone who could stand beside the Alpha King had been long, filled with fear, courage, and moments that had tested every fiber of her being. And now, the ultimate test awaited. The council chamber was tense when they entered. Nobles and advisors, some loyal, some treacherous, waited with measured expressions. Whispers filled the air, and a few sneers were visible, though none dared speak them aloud. All eyes, inevitably, turned to KL, and then to Alara. She felt the weight of their scrutiny, the centuries of expectation, and the shadow of her own doubts. But she stood tall, hands resting lightly at her sides, mind steady. She remembered Kale's lessons. Courage was action, not absence of fear. Strength was in heart as much as in hand. True power was in understanding and guiding, not merely commanding. Kale's gaze found hers. There was no softness, no indulgence, only certainty. And in that certainty, Alara found her own. The enemy moves against us, Kale began, his voice resonating through the chamber. They believe weakness can be exploited, that I can be cornered, that my bonds can be broken. Alara stepped forward slightly, her voice clear, steady, carrying authority she had not known she possessed. They do not know us. They do not know the strength that comes from unity, from understanding, from hearts that refuse to yield. Let them come. We will not falter. A murmur ran through the chamber. Some faces betrayed disbelief, others begrudging admiration. Kale's eyes softened ever so slightly. Not in indulgence, but in acknowledgement. He had watched her grow, guided her, and now she stood beside him as equal, not in title, but in courage and resolve. The first clash came at midday. Dark forces had gathered along the northern border, mercenaries and rogue sorcerers converging with intent to destabilize the kingdom. Kale's army moved with precision, but the enemy's cunning was unpredictable. Alara had studied their strategies, learned their weaknesses from reports and whispers. When Kale looked to her during the battle, she directed movements of troops, signaled hidden maneuvers, and guided scouts along paths only she knew. And when Kale faced the enemy sorcerer, a man whose powers rivaled his own, Alara's quick thinking gave him the edge. She had discovered a flaw in the sorcerer's ritual, a hidden vulnerability, and whispered it to Kale through a discreet signal. With a sudden strike, Kale seized the opportunity, and the enemy faltered, defeated not by raw power alone, but by unity, insight, and the courage of a woman who had once been deemed useless. After the battle, the kingdom breathed, and the air was thick with the scent of victory and the quiet mourning of those lost. Kale's eyes found Alara amidst the crowd, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. The bond between them, strengthened by trials, danger, and trust, was undeniable. Later, in the quiet of the castle's inner courtyard, Kale approached her. The night was cool, moonlight bathing them in silver light. The mark on her wrist glowed faintly, a subtle heartbeat in rhythm with her own. "You have grown, Alara," Kale said softly, though his voice carried the weight of authority. "Stronger, braver, wiser than I imagined. And yet, this is only the beginning. The challenges to your heart, your will, and your bond with me are far from over." Alara lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes without fear. "I am ready, my lord. Not just for the kingdom, but for this. For us." Kale's expression softened, a rare moment where the king's iron mask fell away to reveal the man beneath. "You speak boldly," he said. "Boldness is necessary for a queen. But remember, love and loyalty are not the same. Both must be earned. Both must be tested." Her heart quickened. She had longed for acknowledgement, respect, and the chance to prove her worth. Now, she had more an opportunity to stand beside Kael not as a slave, not as a servant, but as a partner in both heart and kingdom. Days passed with rebuilding, strategy, and preparation for further threats. The court began to recognize her strength, her insight, and her presence as one that could not be ignored. Slowly, resistance to her authority weakened. Even the most stubborn nobles began to see that she had earned her place beside the Alpha King. Yet, as the kingdom settled into uneasy peace, a shadow from Kael's past emerged. A figure long thought defeated a sorcerer bound by an old curse returned, his eyes glowing with dark intent. Whispers in the halls spoke of vengeance, of magic older than the kingdom itself, and of the trials still to come. Kael's gaze hardened. "So the test continues," he murmured, "and we will face it. Together." Elara's hand found his, the warmth of their bond tangible, the pulse of the mark, a reminder of the fire within her. "Together," she repeated, feeling the certainty of the word. She had survived chains, judgment, and fear. She had grown into herself, and now, she was ready to face whatever came. That night, standing beneath the stars on the castle's highest balcony, they looked out over the kingdom. The winds of change blew through the towers and courtyards, carrying both promise and danger. Kael's hand remained on hers, grounding her even as the world shifted around them. "You have become more than I ever expected," Kael said quietly, "and yet, I fear the darkness that approaches. But I also trust you. You are my queen in waiting, my equal in courage and heart. And if the kingdom falls, we will fall together." Elara's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and love. "I will stand with you, Kael. Not as a servant, not as a pawn, but as your partner, your equal, your queen." The mark on her wrist glimmered faintly, as if acknowledging her words. The castle seemed to hum in response. The stones themselves recognizing her transformation. She was no longer the powerless girl sold into slavery. She was the fire that would ignite courage in others, the bond that would strengthen the Alpha King, and the force that would face darkness with unflinching resolve. And yet, the shadow remained. Outside the walls, enemies gathered, whispers of vengeance and old curses rising with the moon. The challenges were far from over, but within the castle, in the quiet of the night, Elara and Kael stood together, united by trust, courage, and the bond that had begun with a single, fateful mark. The night was theirs for a brief, fragile moment. But the world beyond the walls would test them again, and they would meet it not as master and servant, not as king and pawn, but as equals, hearts intertwined, ready to face destiny together. Elara took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the mark, the strength in her own heart, and the unspoken promise between them. The kingdom, the darkness, the trials, all of it could not shake what had been forged in fire, courage, and trust. She looked at Kael, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight, and whispered, "Whatever comes, we face it together." Kael's lips curved in the faintest, rarest smile. "Together," he echoed, and for the first time, the Alpha King allowed himself to feel not just power, but connection, not just command, but belonging.